Vice President Biden, distinguished visitors, faculty, and students, we are proud and grateful that you chose Tel Aviv University, Israel's major and leading academic institution, to make your only public address during this state trip. Not since Al Gore spoke on the environment in this very hall has there been so much buzz and excitement on campus. The students who sit before you are Israel's gold ore, its oil reserves, its most precious national resource. These young people are our future leaders and innovators, teachers and scientists, artists and entrepreneurs. They are the true future of Israeli-American relations, and they are the ones who, through a combination of brain power and social commitment, will be improving our world. The shared understanding between Israel and the United States that academic excellence powers a nation's growth is just one of the strong bonds between us. Tel Aviv University's own ties with top U.S. universities and important agencies such as the NIH, NASA, and the Department of Defense are deep and extensive. Decades-long cooperation has spanned the academic spectrum, including the fields of biomedicine, high-tech, and national security. The Israel-U.S. relationship itself is a major field of research at the Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, which is affiliated with this university. Vice President Biden, the bilateral relations between the U.S. and Israel have been one of the most significant pillars in almost every facet of our life in Israel, be it the economy, defense, science, or culture. For more than 3.5 decades, you have been an outspoken supporter of these relations. Thank you for being a true friend of Israel and coming here today to share with us your thoughts and those of the United States administration. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Joseph R. Biden. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. Mr. President, thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you for hosting me at such a world-class Center for Higher Learning. It's been a long time since I've been back on campus. I was a mere child, a 31-year-old senator when I was here the first time, but it's a privilege to be back. The past few days, being back in Israel, has been wonderful. It's been an honor to be here, and it's been, I wanted everyone to know, with whom I spoke, and all of you to know, the deep friendship and kinship I feel, as well as President Obama feels, for this magnificent country. I should probably be used to it by now, but I'm always struck every time I come back by the hospitality of the Israeli people. No matter how long I've been away, and I imagine you've experienced this yourself, the instant I return, I feel like I'm at home. I feel like I never left. I feel like things just picked up where they left off the day that I left being here. So please accept my warmest gratitude, as well as that of President Obama, who knows as well as I do the United States has no better friend in the community of nations than Israel. Thank you so much. I see some of my U.S. friends down there in the front row. I won't identify them and ruin their reputations, but they know where my love for this country comes. It started at my dinner table with my father, who you would refer to as a righteous Christian. My dinner table was a place where we gathered to have conversation and incidentally eat, as opposed to the other way around. And my father's support for Israel, his outrage for what had happened in the 30s and the failure of the World Act, his support for the creation of the State of Israel, it generated a feeling for Israel that began in my gut and went to my heart, and the older I got, matured in my mind. During those sessions, my father often spoke passionately about the special connection between the Jewish people and this land. Like many of my countrymen, I experienced the magic of Israel at a relatively young age. At least it looks young now from my perspective. When I first visited here in 1973 on the eve of the Yom Kippur War, your nation was only a quarter century old and I was not much older. Already Israel had a tragic as well as triumphal history behind it. And as we all know, some very difficult days ahead. Already there was a sense in this country that anything was possible. My first meeting in Israel was maybe the one that I carry closest to my heart. My first meeting in Israel was invited by a woman named Golda Meir, who I admired from afar, as millions of Americans did. We sort of claimed her as our own. I know she's Israeli, but we claimed her. We claimed her as our own in America. And I remember walking into her office, and as a young senator, being literally in awe as she was so gracious in the way she accepted me and gave me a hug, more like my mother would, sat down behind her desk, and while chain smoking, she had a series of maps behind her. And there were 6 or 7 maps. She kept flipping the maps up and down and explaining to me what exactly had happened in the Six-Day War. And there was a young man sitting next to me, a guy named Yitzhak Rabin, who I met for the first time. And as she pulled those maps up and down, educating this young senator as to the threat that this young nation of Israel was facing, I guess she could see the sense of apprehension on my face. I found myself the more she talked about 2 million Jews, and back then, by the way, there were not that many Arabs compared to today. The numbers were much smaller, but they were still exponentially larger than the Jewish population. And as she went through the threats that were faced and how it come through the battles of the Six-Day War, she spoke so passionately about her country. And I was concerned. I guess it showed in my face that I was concerned that, surrounded by the neighbors who denied the very right of the nation to exist, how were you going to do this? And the Prime Minister caught me off guard. After about an hour and a half, she looked at me and she said, "Senator, would you like a photo opportunity?" And I thought, what the hell's a photo opportunity? And I said, well, yes, Madam Prime Minister. We opened those double doors and we walked out into the ante room of her office, and there was a lot of press there. And half a dozen photographers and cameras. For me, that was a lot. Not like today. And they started snapping pictures. And while looking straight ahead, she talked to me without turning her head. She said, "Senator, don't look so worried." She said, I said, well, I am, Madam President. And because I just had this hour and a half. And she said, "We Israelis have a secret weapon." And I thought she only had said this to me, no one else in the whole world. She said, "We have a secret weapon in our struggle with the Arabs." And I thought she was going to tell me about a new secret weapon. So I found myself turning and looking at her in the press, because this was all just a stand-up photo opportunity. And she said, "We have a secret weapon. We have nowhere else to go." That trip was almost 4 decades ago. But I remember it as clearly as it happened yesterday. And it drove home all that my father had spoken of, randomly, occasionally, but consistently over the previous 15 years. And he told me as a young boy that Israel and Jews in the world had no place else to go with absolute certitude. This place, it gets in your blood. It never really lets you go. I expect that there are several people in the audience today who've had similar experiences, who first came here as tourists or religious pilgrims and ended up making Aliyah and launching a new life in northern kibbutz or a small town in the Negev or in the beautiful city by the sea. Throughout my career, Israel has not only remained close to my heart, but it's been the center of my work as a United States Senator and now as Vice President of the United States. I've had the privilege of returning many times and to know every one of your prime ministers over these past 3.5 decades, including your current leader, who is a close personal friend of over 33 years, Bibi Netanyahu. Israel history is a tale of remarkable accomplishment. On a perilous patch of desert with sparse natural resources, you built perhaps the most innovative economy in the world. You have more startups per capita than any nation on the planet, more firms in the NASDAQ exchange than anyone except the United States, and more U.S. patents per capita than any country, including my own. You've cultivated the gifts of 11 Nobel laureates, the great, and as well as those of the great Isaac Perlman. In the recent years, you have Shea Agassi, whose path-breaking work on electric automobiles began not very far from where I stand. Israel owes this remarkable and yet improbable success, I believe, to your democratic traditions, to this patriotic and pioneering citizens, and, as with my own country, to its willingness to welcome the persecuted and downtrodden from far-flung corners of the globe. All this gives life to Theodore Herzl's famous slogan, which I was reminded of this week while visiting his grave on this 150th anniversary of his birth. He said, "If you will it, it is no dream." I had said in a speech in the United States some years ago, for which I got some criticism, I said, were I a Jew, I would be a Zionist, and it got a lot of national publicity. How could I say that? Until I was reminded by my father, you need not be a Jew to be a Zionist. Ladies and gentlemen, just over 60 years ago, Israel founders gave life to Herzl's dream by willing Israel into being. Since then, this nation has become more than an undeniable fact, more than just a legacy of age-old ties between a people and a land, though it is both of those things. Your very existence is also a hard-won and inviolable right. Israel's unique relationship with the United States means that you need not bear that heavy burden alone. Our nation's unbreakable bond, born of common values, interwoven cultures, and mutual interest, has spanned the entirety of Israel's history. And it's impervious to any shifts in either country and either country's partisan politics. No matter what challenges we face, this bond will endure. As a result, generations of Israelis and Americans and American Israelis have kept a foot in each country, enriching both our nations and our peoples. I met with some of your leading high-tech leaders earlier prior to coming to the stage. They have a foot in both countries, many of them. All these close relationships span the realm of commerce and education, medicine and technology, culture and the arts. At its core is an ironclad commitment to security, Israel and my own countries. Every day Israel faces bravely threats no country should have to endure. No parent should send their child to schools equipped with air raid sirens in the year 2010. No government should be expected to turn a blind eye while an enemy calls for its destruction. I'm here to remind you, though I hope you will never forget, that America stands with you shoulder to shoulder in facing these threats. President Obama and I represent an unbroken chain of American leaders who've understood this critical strategic relationship. As the President said recently, and I quote, "I will never waver from ensuring Israel's security and helping them secure themselves in what is a very hostile region." End of quote. President Obama has not only stated those words, he's translated that vow into action in his first year in ways both known to the public and not known to you, as Prime Minister Netanyahu eloquently acknowledged the other day when he and I were meeting and had a short press conference that followed. Beyond providing Israel nearly $3 billion in military aid each and every year, we have reinvigorated defense consultations and redoubled our efforts to ensure that Israel's forces will always maintain a qualitative edge. We lead the fight in international institutions against the insidious campaign to challenge Israel's legitimacy and to question its right to self-defense. Since our administration came to office, our militaries have expanded cooperation, not maintained, expanded cooperation in joint exercises in missile defense. Last fall, more than 1,000 American troops participated in Juniper Cobra ballistic missile defense exercises, the largest such drill to date. And it should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway, so there is no doubt. The United States stands resolutely beside Israel against the scourge of terrorism, from which both of our countries have suffered badly. No one in this audience needs to be reminded of the fear and devastation caused by suicide bombers or by rockets from southern Lebanon or from Gaza. The band of Israeli territory outside the rocket's range grows narrower all the time. And I, as an American, continue to marvel at the residents in the region being able to resolutely get up every morning, the communities, other communities that in fact are within the bullseye, the crosshairs, how you respond to that with defiance and not fear. American support for Israel is not just an act of friendship. It's an act of fundamental national self-interest on the part of the United States, a key component to our broader efforts to secure this region and a wider world as well as our own security. Ladies and gentlemen, I've heard it raised occasionally in editorials in this country and others who are wondering about our resolve. Make no mistake about America's resolve. Make no mistake about America's resolve. We have 200,000 young women and men. We are spending $250 billion a year. We have had tens of thousands of fallen angels and multiple times more injured in the service of our nation, deployed far from home in Iraq and Afghanistan. There and elsewhere, we are aggressively confronting violent extremism and radical ideologies that threaten not only you in the United States, but our allies as well. But our approach consists more than the awesome military might we possess and are willing to use. From the very start, President Obama has called for a new era of diplomatic engagement with both our friends, some of whom we had alienated the previous years, as well as those who are not viewed as our friends. In Cairo last June, he launched a new beginning between the United States and the Muslim communities around the world. Later this month, the President will continue this engagement by visiting Indonesia, the home of the world's largest Muslim population, where he lived as a boy. We are absolutely convinced that this approach will improve not only our security, but as a consequence, your security. A new generation of Muslims is coming to age, more numerous than its predecessors, more dispersed geographically, and because of technology, more closely connected with each other and with the forces and events that shape the world we share. If we can roll back recent tensions and redirect crude stereotypes, theirs and our own, it will make America safer and our closest allies like Israel safer as well, in our view. We're returning an ambassador to Damascus and elevating our diplomatic contacts. We do so with our eyes wide open, both to our deep concerns with Syrian actions that threaten your security and the stability of the region, and also to the hope of a better relationship and peace between Israel and Syria. And we will continue to help strengthen the institutions in Lebanon and work to implement the UN Security Council resolutions aimed at ending the flow of weapons to Hezbollah and disarming this threat to Israel, as well as to the civilian Lebanese. With other Arab and Muslim countries, we are revitalizing a partnership in education, science, technology, business, culture, because that is the best way to counter the lure of extreme ideology, is to offer future opportunity. In speaking with your Prime Minister recently, he talked about the high birth rates in neighboring poor countries, including Yemen, and the need for us to provide economic outlets and opportunities so there is an option. Looming over all our efforts in this region is the shadow cast by Iran, home of a great civilization and proud people who suffer from a leadership that flouts the will of the world by pursuing nuclear weapons and supporting terrorism and terrorists. Over the past decade, Iran has become more, not less dangerous, building thousands of centrifuges that churn out nuclear material, funding and arming dangerous proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas, intimidating both its neighbors as well as its own citizens. From the moment we were elected, President Obama decided that we needed a new approach. He has sought to engage Iran's leadership for the purpose of changing their conduct, knowing full well how difficult that may be, but also knowing that if they fail to respond, we would be in a much stronger position to rally the international community to impose consequences for their actions. Iran thus far has refused to cooperate, as the whole world has witnessed. Instead, has engaged in more violations of international obligations like undeclared enrichment facilities that were recently exposed by the United States, and the decision to enrich uranium to 20% to build more enrichment facilities, all violations. It rejected a good faith offer to exchange this low-enriched uranium for fuel that could power a research reactor to produce medical isotopes. And it continues to deploy thugs to lock up and beat down those who bravely take to the streets in a quest for basic justice in their own country. The Iranian leadership's continuing defiance has set the stage for our efforts to mobilize the world to impose meaningful sanctions that clarify for the Iranian leadership the stark choice: follow international rules or face harsh penalties and further isolation. I think you'd have to acknowledge that today Iran is more isolated with its own people as well as the region and the world than it has been any time in the past 2 decades. The United States is determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, period. I know that for Israel, there is no greater existential strategic threat. Trust me, we get that. It's also a threat, the acquisition of nuclear weapons by Iran. It's also a threat to the security, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, to the United States of America. And many other countries in this region and around the world strongly oppose a nuclear-armed Iran. It would threaten them, trigger an arms race in this region, and undermine the efforts to stop the spread of nuclear weapons, which would be a sorry outcome for such a promising beginning in the 21st century. For all those reasons, confronting this challenge is and must be a top national priority for the United States of America. We're determined to keep the pressure on Iran so that it will change its course. And as we do, we will also be seeking to improve relations between the Israelis and Palestinians. They are connected indirectly, but there is a relationship. We call on Arab states who share a mutual concern about Iran. We call on Arab states to support the effort to bring peace between Palestinians and Israelis and to take their own steps forward for peace with Israel. These are critical goals in their own rights. Their pursuit also denies Tehran the opportunity to exploit the differences between Israelis and Palestinians and Israelis in the Arab world, and to distract the many countries that stand united against Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons and the support of terrorism. Building peace and security between a Jewish democratic state of Israel and a viable independent Palestinian state is profoundly in Israel's interest, if you'll forgive me for suggesting that. I've learned never tell another man or another country what's in their own interest, but it seems self-evident. It's also profoundly in the interest of Palestinians. And it's fundamentally in the national security interest of the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, in my experience, one necessary precondition for progress is that the rest of the world knows this. There is no space. This is what they must know. Every time progress is made, it's been made when the rest of the world knows there is absolutely no space between the United States and Israel when it comes to security. None. No space. That's the only time when progress has been made. And I applaud Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent call for 2 states for 2 people, lending a vital voice to what the Israelis, Palestinians, their Arab neighbors all know in their heart to be true. Ladies and gentlemen, the status quo is not sustainable. The status quo is not sustainable. It's no secret that demographic realities make it increasingly difficult for Israel to remain both a Jewish homeland and a democratic country in the absence of a Palestinian state. Genuine steps toward a 2-state solution are also required to empower those living to live in peace and security with Israel and to undercut their rivals who will never accept that future. For Israel, then, this is about both preserving your identity and achieving the security you deserve, lasting security. For Palestinians, statehood will not just fulfill a legitimate and long-sought aspiration common to all peoples, it will restore the fundamental dignity and self-respect that their current predicament denies them. I understand why both sides are skeptical. I've been doing this for a long time. Not as long as my friend Dennis Ross, who's with me. He's with me. He has even more experience in the nitty-gritty of this than I do. We understand why both sides are skeptical. We've been down this road before. So have you. Which every time makes it a little harder to go down the road again. But I know that Israel's faith in the prospects for peace have been shaken by the Syrian experience of withdrawing from Lebanon and from Gaza, only to be rewarded with rocket fire and ambushes across your border. I know you've been frustrated by the unwillingness of some Palestinian leaders to curb incitement and take the risks that peace requires. Just as when the West Bank checkpoints proliferate and settlements grow, the Palestinians experience their own crisis in confidence and come to doubt Israeli intentions. We all know what happens when cynicism festers. Distrust, harsh words, and eventually violence. The cycle of unintended consequences, which has happened more times than I can count, has led you to build more walls that may offer short-term relief, but will not bring sustained security that you seek. This is no way to live. This cycle must be broken. In the Middle East that I first visited, peace between Israelis and its neighbors seemed absolutely impossible even to discuss. Those who suggested a 2-state solution, and no one did then actually, But had someone suggested a two-state solution, they would have been considered either demented or dreamers. But then Israel, Egypt, and Jordan all acted boldly to end decades of conflict. Over time, other contacts have emerged between Israelis and Arabs. And there is now an Arab peace initiative that makes an important contribution by envisioning a future in which Israel is secure and at peace with its Arab neighbors. Turning these visions into reality is among the hardest challenges we face. But we have to face it. There is no alternative. As Prime Minister Netanyahu said, and I quote, all sides need to take action in good faith if peace is to have a chance. But it's hard. My words, it's hard. Well, it's always easier to point fingers. It's time for Israelis and Palestinian leaders to acknowledge each other's steps to heed this call, even when more remains to be done, and for the world to do the same thing. Your prime minister is roundly criticized in other parts of the world, but your prime minister has endorsed the idea of a Palestinian state. He has removed roadblocks and checkpoints that choked the West Bank. These were difficult decisions. Not all that was asked for on the other side, but these were difficult decisions. It's also difficult for the Palestinian Authority to take a step that it has to take to combat incitement and reform the institutions it's reforming. Of an even greater note, it's building an effective, for the first time, a genuinely effective security force to uphold law and order in Area A. In my view, with the potential to do it throughout the West Bank and throughout the Palestinian territories. President Obama and I believe that in President Abbas and Prime Minister Fayyad, men who I've known for a long time, Israeli leaders finally have willing partners who share the goal of peace between two states and have the competence to establish a nation. Their commitment to peace is an opportunity that must be seized. It must be seized. Who has there been better to date to have the prospect of settling this with? But instead, 2 days ago, the Israeli government announced it would advance planning for new housing units in East Jerusalem. I realize this is a very touchy subject in Israel as well as in my own country, but because that decision, in my view, undermined the trust required for productive negotiations, I, and at the request of President Obama, condemned it immediately and unequivocally. Now, some of you legitimately may have been surprised that such a strong supporter of Israel for the last 37 years and beyond, but 37 years as an elected official, how I could speak out so strongly, given the ties that I share as well as my country shares with Israel. But quite frankly, folks, sometimes only a friend can deliver the hardest truth. And I appreciate, by the way, the response your Prime Minister today announced this morning that he's putting in place a process to prevent the recurrence of that sort of events, and who clarified that the beginning of actual construction on this particular project would likely take several years. That statement he put out. That's significant because it gives negotiations the time to resolve this as well as other outstanding issues. Because when it was announced, I was in the West Bank. Everyone there thought it had meant immediately the resumption of the construction of 1,600 new units. Look, folks, as we move forward, I promise you this. The United States will continue to hold both sides accountable for any statements or any actions that inflame tensions or prejudice the outcome of these talks. The most important thing is for these talks to go forward and go forward promptly and go forward in good faith. We can't delay, because when progress is postponed, extremists exploit our differences, and they sow hate. These indirect talks, everyone knows, are just that, indirect talks, indirect negotiations. The only path, though, to finally resolving the permanent status issues, including borders, security, refugees in Jerusalem, are direct talks. Our administration, but you've got to begin. The process has to begin. Our administration fully supports this effort, led by our special envoy, Senator George Mitchell, a seasoned negotiator and a proven peacemaker, in whom the President, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and I have complete and utter confidence. We believe that through good faith negotiations, the parties can mutually agree to an outcome which ends the conflict and reconciles the Palestinian goal of an independent and viable state based on the 67 lines of the agreed swaps, and Israel's goal of a Jewish state with secure and recognized borders that reflect subsequent developments and meet Israel's security requirements. Many challenges remains. Gilad Shalit is still in captivity, and we pray every day for the day when he'll come home and be reunited with his family. Ladies and gentlemen, incitement against Israel continues, as do attacks on the legitimacy of Jewish ties to this ancient land. And the ongoing threat from Gaza, still in Hamas's grip, and from Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, remind us that your security is far from assured. Meanwhile, though, our policy and our concerns about Israel's settlements remain unchanged. And while Hamas has condemned Gaza's populace to misery and hopelessness, Israel, too, has a responsibility to address their many needs. That's why we're working with the Israeli government to do just that, address some of those legitimate needs without further endangering Israel's security. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a Roman Catholic, and I'm no expert on the Old Testament. But I know we're gathered today between Purim and Passover, holidays that teach us about salvation and redemption. It was written in the book of Isaiah that Israel shall be a light unto the nations. And yet, for more than 6 decades, Israelis have often sought but never found the salvation of a lasting peace. And it's very hard to be a beacon for others when you are constantly at war. To end this historic conflict, both sides must be historically bold, because if each waits stubbornly for the other to act first, this will go on and be waiting for an eternity. Back home, I'm sometimes called an optimist, but I am an optimist about the prospects for peace because I am a realist. And to paraphrase Golda Meir, there is nowhere else to go. There is nowhere else to go. I cannot tell you that peace will come easily. You know better. In human history, it rarely has. But I can promise you, both Israeli and Palestinians, that the rewards for success will be boundless. And that so long as well-intentioned people are engaged in this struggle, the United States will be your partner. Thank you, and may God protect you, and may God protect Israel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's very generous. When I'm on a university campus, I have the bad habit of staying until all the lights go out and answering your questions, because I tend to learn more from you like you to learn from me. But I have a meeting with your Minister of Defense, an old friend, Ehud Barak, that I'm already late for. But I'm sure he'll understand if I take a couple questions, if you're willing to do that. And I'll try to be as concise and straightforward as I can with you. And I'm going to let the 6 of you with your hands raised pick one of you up there to, we'll see about cooperation. In the very back row, any one of you, the young man standing now. Can we get a microphone to him? I'm making the staff work hard. I picked the guy furthest away. And I'm sorry, I can't really see in the balcony. Are there microphones in the balcony? What I'm going to do is anybody up in the balcony with a mic, is any staff with microphones in the balcony? All right, I'm going to let, since I can't see, I'm going to lay it on you. Pick out the next person right now so we can go from down here up to the balcony after this question. Then I'll take one more after that. Sir, if you have a microphone, fire away.
Yeah, I do. Okay. I'm Danny from the One Voice movement in Tel Aviv University here. Now, the majority of Israelis are willing to accept the creation of an independent Palestinian state. Nevertheless, the agenda is constantly hijacked by the extremists on both sides. What do your administration and, in your opinion, the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority need from us, the moderate majority, in order to get back to negotiating and reaching an agreement? Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Well, first of all, as I've said to Mr. Abbas, Mr. Fayyad, Prime Minister Netanyahu, with everyone whom I've met, the United States cannot want peace more than you do. Let me say that again. It sounds ridiculous to say it that way. I've said this to your ambassador as well. The United States cannot want peace more than the Palestinians want it or more than the Israelis want it. So it's ultimately up to you all. We can't dictate anything. We can facilitate. We can bridge differences. We can hopefully, and I'm going to say something outrageous, I believe I personally and my nation personally has the trust of the Prime Minister of Israel and your defense establishment as well as others, and I'm confident that we've been able to gain the trust of Mr. Fayyad and also President Abbas. So hopefully we can facilitate. What we came up with in order to figure out, and both sides have been saying to us they want to get back into negotiations. But it's a very hard thing to do. So we came up, you all came up with a construct. The first construct is to have what became known as proximity talks. In other words, have us as a go-between. Talk to us. Talk to us and tell us how you want to begin this process, Israelis and Palestinians. Because ironically, folks, there is more in common about what the elements of an agreement would be now than there ever has been. Like I said, I mean, if you had told me 30 years ago when I was here that everyone would be saying the starting point is a two-state solution, I would have told you, God, that's wonderful, but I haven't heard anybody say that. The proximity talks are designed to raise issues of consequence, but with the knowledge that, and to have some confidence building, but with the knowledge that ultimately, the leaders are going to have to talk face to face. They're going to have to sit down in a room and resolve the differences. Now look, what I'm about to say, I'm not speaking for either an Israeli leader or a Palestinian leader. I'm just I sometimes get introduced back home as I'm a foreign policy expert. Well, an expert's anyone from out of town with a briefcase. I don't have a briefcase with me. And all foreign policy is, and the foreign policy specialists at the university are going to be mad I degraded the title, but all foreign policy is a logical extension of personal relationships with a whole lot less specific information to go on. And so folks, you students here, you get it. Probably get it better than the adults do. What happens here? It's very difficult when both societies are strained to the breaking point and lack so little trust in one another and sometimes their own leaders. It's very difficult for a leader to go out and say, okay, if there's 5 points that have to be negotiated, I'll agree with you on point 1. and then we'll get to point 2, 3, 4, and 5. What will happen is it will cost them politically, whether it's an Israeli or a Palestinian. It will probably cost them dearly, and they'll never get to point 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the trick here is, how do you build enough confidence where the leaders of both countries are prepared to actually, hopefully, in my view, me speaking, in secret, are able to actually sit down? Not in the glare of cameras, not because they want to hide anything, but so they have a chance to come forward with a fulsome product. Because anything other than a fulsome product, a total deal, just puts them in a position where they can be actually ripped to shreds by their opposition in both countries. It's a difficult spot. There's nothing easy about it. But also, there's nothing real complicated about it. It's human nature. It's the way things work out. It's a little bit like saying you're going to settle a serious disagreement you have with your husband or wife or the person you love the most, and there's 4 or 5 things you say, well, let's start talking about the car first. It ain't the problem. The car's not the problem. The problem is, were you loyal to me? You're not loyal to me. You better get it all done at once. And so I realize I'm being very simplistic, but in a sense, it is as simple as it's complicated. You got to get to the point where the leaders are actually able to sit, and hopefully what we can do in these proximity talks, being available to both parties, we can be a bridging mechanism. One leader said to me, Joe, all you have to tell me is the other guy really has a plan. Look me in the eye and tell me you believe they really have a whole plan, and I'm willing to sit down. Both sides doubt. The other side has, even if they have the will, doubt whether they have the political capacity. So this is a process of building. But ultimately, it's going to have to be, and I hope I'm answering your question, it's going to have to be the parties sitting down in a room, looking at one another, and there'll be stages before they get to that, with a total deal. It's not going to come out piecemeal. It'll be very difficult for it to survive in this political atmosphere and in the atmosphere of the press. And I'm not blaming the press for anything. But it's just very difficult. It's very difficult unless you have all the pieces and you've agreed on all the major pieces. And I think that's what eventually will happen. At least that's my hope. I can't see up in the balcony, but I'm sure you gave the microphone to someone, so just fire away with a question. I apologize. These lights are in my eyes. And then I'll take one more question down here, and I'll get out of your hair. Fire away up in the balcony, whoever has the microphone. My dad used to have an expression. He'd say, reality has a way of intruding on events. I think the most likely thing to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon will be a unified condemnation by the rest of the world and the imposition of real sanctions that make it clear to them that the price to pay for continued pursuit of that objective is much more costly than ceasing and desisting from that pursuit. That's why we're working with the international community now, and I might add, have agreement with your country as well that the next best step to proceed is to the sanctions route, to move on imposing genuine sanctions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very fluid situation. It's fluid in Iran. It's fluid in the region. It's fluid in the world. If you had been told, or I had been told 2 years ago, that tens of thousands of Iranians would be marching in the street challenging the authority of the supreme leader and significantly sort of, breaching the unbreachable, which is that the emperor has no clothes, I doubt whether many of you would have said that was likely to occur. This is a very dynamic situation. I'm not predicting anything in particular about what will happen internally in Iran. But I am suggesting that no one knows what is going on fully within Iran. We make it a 10 feet tall and completely united and without any divisions. There's significant divisions, not only between the populace and the Iranian government, within the government. So the most effective thing we can do is impose sanctions on the sources within that government that are in charge of pursuing and benefiting from the pursuit of attempting to acquire a nuclear weapon. That is what we should be doing now, and I am not going to, nor would it be profitable to speculate on what should be done in addition to that, were that not to fail, or were that to fail. We believe that is the single best approach, and we believe it will bear fruit. Last question. Let me get someone down here in the front. The young man just underneath the cameras there. Yes, sir. I'm really sorry. A few of you in here know me. You know I'd much prefer, although I love Ehud, I'd much prefer to stay here and answer the rest of your questions because it gives me an insight as to what you're thinking.
Yes. My name is Roy. I'm a BA student in Middle Eastern Studies, and I would like to ask you to answer in what steps are you going to take to encourage other Middle Eastern countries to enter into dialogue with Israel, specifically Lebanon, for example?
Did y'all hear the question? What would I do to encourage other countries in the Middle East to enter into a dialogue with Israel, and particularly Lebanon? First of all, I think there are a series of opportunities that exist now in the mutual interest of your neighboring countries as well as Israel that didn't exist before. Some for good reasons, some for not such good reasons. For example, there is much more cooperation and mutual concern in relative terms with other Arab nations and Israel because of sort of the unintended uniting consequences Iran has had. You have other Middle Eastern countries as worried about the acquisition of nuclear weapons and, most urgently, the active support of terrorist groups by the Iranian government than ever existed before. And that has a consequence of increasing connections, dialogue, discussions between countries. I'm not going to characterize the degree of them, but it just opens up an avenue that never existed before. It's a mutual interest. Secondly, the very men and women with whom I met earlier, who are the economic engine, the imagination, the technological future, not only for this country but for the region and the world, it is not lost on the Arab world that their progress, their ability to thrive and prosper depends on access to and cooperation with the very people that are at this university and the men and women sitting in the front row and throughout this audience. So again, I don't want to exaggerate it, but there is much more intercourse between people because one of the things that's becoming apparent even to the oligarchies in the region is they've got to make plans to transition. They are not stupid. It's not like they don't understand what's happening within their own populations. And that is, there's a need to provide for employment. Absent providing for employment, absent providing economic opportunity and outlets, their very existence is in jeopardy. So again, maybe not for the noblest of reasons, and some for very noble reasons. There is a growing awareness that what you have produced, what you have generated, and you see it in the West Bank every day, by the way, very close proximity. And that is something that would benefit my people. So the scientific intercourse, the social intercourse, the economic intercourse between nations, increasingly, incrementally, is beginning to happen. And my advice, and I will not name the countries, but I get an opportunity to meet with, particularly as folks come through Washington, and I travel in this part of the world frequently. My advice is to everyone, leader with whom I speak, is you better get ready for the future. You have no choice. You have no choice. And the best way to do that is begin to expand relationships with Israel. It's in your naked self-interest, as well as in Israel's interest. So this is going to be slow in coming. But events are altering attitudes. And not all negatively, some of them positively. Let me give you an analogy so I don't get into characterizing any one Middle Eastern country, because the whole idea here is to this is a process for them as well, how far out in front they can get. Take Iraq. Iraq is a country that has been dominated by a dictator for decades. Not in recent history had a nation state you'd call anything that was anything remotely close to even a participatory, let alone democracy, entity. And strange things happen. Politics has broken out. I spent a lot of time in Iraq. Is it going to be a democracy like Israel in this region in the near term? No. But is there a political accommodation that's beginning to work, and power sharing that I predict is going to occur? 62% of the folks showed up to vote, 75% of the Sunnis in Anbar province. You go, why? What happened? Are they just tired of fighting and killing each other? Is there something else going on? There's something else going on. All of a sudden, I figured out there's a whole hell of a lot of oil and natural gas. It's not only in Anbar province, it's not only in Kirkuk and Basra, it's all throughout the country. And with just rational husbanding of the resource, it's expected they'll be pumping as much oil as Saudi Arabia in 10 years, over 10 million barrels a day. I realize it's an oxymoron, but oil is becoming the glue to hold that country together. Everybody's figuring out it's better to be in the deal than out of the deal. I don't mean just for personal profit. I don't mean that. I mean, all of a sudden, there's a way forward. It's going to be wrenching. It's going to be fits and starts. It's not going to be perfect. But they look around at their neighbors. They look around at their opportunity. They look around at the situation they find themselves in, and for the first time, what didn't seem possible 10, 15 years ago, or even 4 years ago, is within the realm of possibility. Again, I don't want to be Pollyannish about this. I don't want to be naive about this. I don't want to be, and I'm not being idealistic about it. It's just the reality. The reality is all the countries who have been your nemesis all are now dealing with an emerging problems in the 21st century that are going to lead them to take actions other than war in order to be able to accommodate their future and even their survival and their leadership. And Israel is uniquely positioned now. With a little bit of luck, as my grandfather used to say, with the grace of God and the goodwill of the neighbors, with the grace of God and a whole lot of hard work, there's a possibility over the next that your children sitting in this audience will be in a very, very different, significantly more secure and more prosperous area of the world. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the alternative is unthinkable. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. Hope you have me back. Thanks. Miss Libney, how are you? Thank you.